Live from CUBE headquarters in Palo Alto, California, it's the Silicon Valley Friday Show with John Furrier.
Welcome to the Silicon Valley Friday Show. I'm John Furrier. A great show for you lined up. What a week it's been here in Silicon Valley and in Barcelona, where we had a first ever remote CUBE broadcast here from our studios in the CUBE in Palo Alto, where we had an in-studio 2 days special broadcast coverage with all of our friends, experts, commentary, influencers, analysts, breaking down and covering Mobile World Congress in Spain. That was Monday and Tuesday. We had people on the ground in Barcelona, reporters, analysts, and friends calling in, and we had almost 30 interviews here inside the CUBE. It was great. We have two guests that are going to be on today. Saar Gillai, also called Sarcastic Gillai because he was kind of critical on 5G, one of the hot trends in Silicon Valley. And Alan Cohen, one of our previous guests on Silicon Valley Friday show, and he's going to be talking about, Mobile World Congress. He's a wireless expert, but also we're going to talk about some of the societal issues around Silicon Valley, some politics around tech policy, and some other kind of Sunday conversations you usually see on the talk shows. But first, in Silicon Valley this week, the big story, besides Mobile World Congress on our 2-day coverage, was the Snapchat IPO filing, which was reported by the Wall Street Journal a few days ago that their initial public offering is going to be around $17 a share, up from $14 to $16, and that's going to raise a valuation of $24 billion. And so a lot of criticism is already coming on the Twitter sphere and in the conversations around they don't have what it takes, they may not make it, they're losing users to Instagram, and they're doing too much work around drones and 360-degree cameras. Here's my take. I think Snapchat can and most likely will be very, very successful, and I'll tell you why. But there is a caveat to that. If Snapchat doesn't fall into the trap of trying to be like Facebook today, can win. And if they build a platform, whether it's camera-based or whatever, and then not try to do anything other than what Snapchat does, keep that feature, and then use the cash to buy growth. And this is what Facebook did. So remember Facebook. Facebook tried to be successful, but first thing that they did was they broke out of the college game by letting parents in into Facebook. They built the platform in 2007, and then they tried to go beyond Facebook. Yeah, they had advertising product. That wasn't a user product. Facebook was a one-trick pony. It still is only one application. They failed at Poke. They failed at a variety of efforts during their key phase of growth and failed. This is proof positive that if Snapchat tries too much in R&D, they'll never get there. They got to use the cash and they got to buy companies. So that's that. Other news is, Uber still is in the news this week. There was a video of Travis, the CEO, kind of laying into a driver, and I thought it was a little bit. He was obviously looked like he was drunk. He was probably buzzed. And we take Uber. People take Uber when they drink too much. And the guy was basically talking about the black car rates and how they dropped. And he basically snapped at the end and left the cab. It went viral. He's now apologizing. Another PR disaster, one after the other. I think a little bit over the top, but still they got problems at Uber, and hopefully they can clear that up. Big fan of the company. But again, more action, more talk about entrepreneurship. We're going to do that in our next segment with Saar Gillai and Alan Cohen. Again, this is the Silicon Valley Friday show here in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. I'm John Furrier. We'll be back with more after this short break.
Complex integrations and bloated enterprise applications are in the past. Welcome to the age of the Agile Business App. Brought to you by SAP Cloud Platform. With comprehensive application development services and capabilities, you can extend and personalize your current on-premises and cloud applications. Quickly build and deploy rich, lightweight, enterprise-ready cloud apps. Integrate and connect everything, regardless of where it is or who built it. Connect your fleet, your assets, your anything to the Internet of Things. Discover over 1,000 apps built by SAP partners on the only platform as a service designed for your mission-critical business apps and brought to you by the global leader of business applications. SAP Cloud Platform drives business agility, supports and optimizes enterprise while accelerating your company's digital transformation journey now and into the future. With SAP Cloud Platform, the age of the agile business app belongs to you. SAP Cloud Platform.
You're listening to the Silicon Valley Friday Show with John Furrier.
Welcome to the Silicon Valley Friday Show. I'm John Furrier. Our guest today is Saar Gillai, entrepreneur, in between gigs, former SVP and GM of the communications division at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, reporting to Meg Whitman, built that business from the ground up to thousands of people. Thanks for spending the time.
Great to be here.
So 5G is the big theme at Mobile World Congress. Network transformation is the big theme at Mobile World Congress this past week in Barcelona. You have a dynamic now where real tech's being built, right? And so you're starting to see more action. I call it more action in hardcore tech. Certainly, you get the application guys still doing their thing. It's complicated now. It's not as easy to get into the infrastructure game. And some of the VCs that I've talked to who have been hardcore infrastructure servers and networks say it's moving from plumbing to machinery. So it's not really that good for entrepreneurs in the infrastructure, but it's certainly changing. There are opportunities. What's your thoughts going on right now?
Well, I think there's always a dynamic. I mean, certainly the public cloud, has taken a lot of the oxygen out of the system in terms of infra. Classic infra. I mean, obviously you see a lot of activity around hyperconverged, although honestly to me hyperconverged is just basically, storage. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, you can call it hyperconverged, but it's just, new storage using, virtualized storage using classic, Intel architecture. And, that's a good market. There's good opportunities there. What I do see actually that's quite interesting that I think has been one of the things that I think is a bit surprising. I think there's a resurgence in specialized hardware, even at the chip level. And the reason for that is because what we are seeing is sort of the slowing down, if not the end of Moore's Law. Certainly it's slowed down.
You were on our our special coverage of Mobile World Congress, and we talked about 5G. That seems to be the gravity point in wireless. You and I talked before we came on here that you got some new data, you did some digging around, and you got some more skepticism or hype opinions on 5G. What are they?
I brought some salt to put in the Kool-Aid. No, no. I mean, look, I think it's important. People get ahead of themselves. I think 5G, the thing is to understand, what is the technical things behind 5G, because I think if you understand what the technology is, it helps to understand how it can be applied. And if you look at cellular today, right, it's primarily used, the bandwidth, the bands used for cellular are somewhere between 700 megahertz to maybe 2.4. In some places a bit higher, but generally speaking, that's it, or 2.2, 2.5, Sprint has some 2.5. But under 3 megahertz typically, okay? Those have a really good propagation. They propagate really well. They go through walls. There's a reason we're using those frequencies.
Good for transceivers, good to receive,
yeah, and then they go through walls, they go through things. It's that bandwidth doesn't have a ton of capacity, although it's got a fair amount, because the higher the frequency, the more capacity it has. Now, you can improve, how many, the real question always is how many bits per hertz, right? How many bits per hertz you can squeeze, and you can improve that by using MIMO, right? Multiple in, multiple out, massive MIMO, and so forth. But you're not going to have improvements by order of magnitude. Okay, we're already doing this. You can see it in Wi-Fi. So, and LTE Advanced and LTE Pro and all these other LTE things already do that, and you're going to probably see more of that being rolled out than 5G. 5G really talks about, beyond just these improvements, also using other bands. Primarily millimeter wave bands, or bands that are, 5 gigahertz, for example, which is used for Wi-Fi, so they want to use some of that, 28, 27, 60, so forth. And there, all of a sudden, you have so much more spectrum. And that will actually give you things like 10 gigabit and so forth. But there's one minor issue that nobody seems to talk about. These things don't go through walls. Again, I can't keep on repeating this, okay? They don't go through walls. They don't go through rain.
Well, and trees, of course.
And trees and all kinds of other things that happen to exist in the universe. And so the way 5G is being looked at is that, yes, you'll be able to use that in certain situations. And in other situations, you'll be using like LTE Advanced and the existing bands. The point is that the mileage will vary depending on line of sight. You shouldn't assume that everything you get today was LTE, you're going to be able to get was 28 megahertz. It's not gigahertz. It's not going to happen.
I mean, we've all been in tunnels. We've all been in those holes where the dead spots.
You can be in your room.
Yeah, but here's where I'll push back on you. I agree. So let's break down the basics of wireless. Not that I want to.
It's okay, you got me at I agree.
Okay. I agree to some level, but let's go down and for the folks watching, kind of do a 101 on wireless. There's line of sight, which means a frequency a signal goes out, and the antenna on the phone has to see each other and talk back and handshake back and forth. Then there's more of a cloud-like propagation, like spread spectrum, for instance, on Wi-Fi, where it goes through walls and whatnot.
And 2.4. I mean, 5, for those of you at home, know that 5 gigahertz, for example, the people who use 5.4 or 5.8 or 5 in Wi-Fi will know that, while you have more power, right, it doesn't go through walls as well.
And the ones that go through walls is the holy grail. I think UHF, for instance, you put a little antenna on your TV back in the old days, you get the signal, but then you lose your bandwidth. So there's different characteristics of the wireless for that.
Correct.
So that's that. So now that's assuming that you're saying that the 5G is a one-trick pony spectrum.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm not saying that.
Okay, well, I thought you said that.
What I'm saying, look, there's spectrum that exists and there's spectrum that is not available. The spectrum that they're talking about is there's the existing LTE spectrum, but most of that is spoken for or owned by various players. Like I think, again, if you look today, now there's still bids.
All the auctions and all that big money games.
I think AT&T, for example, I believe, I could be wrong, so I don't want to be like, but in general, I think they own about 60 megahertz in those bands.
Yep.
They can buy some more, but they're not going to buy another 2 gigahertz. That spectrum in the nice bands, the bands that are useful, that propagate really well, that's spoken for, and there's not a ton of it.
It's scarce.
And you can add MIMO and a bunch of other things to get some more bits per hertz, but it's not order of magnitude.
You're squeezing that last efficiency out of it, basically.
Yeah, LTE is already pretty good. There's always more you can do. I told you there's a startup that I am familiar with that actually is trying to do much better, but in general. Now.
But 1 gigabit LTE, which is what the analysts at Mobile World I was talking about, would be damn good. Right?
That's going to be hard. That's going to be really hard in the existing spectrum. When they're talking about that, they're talking about millimeter wave. Okay. That's what I keep on saying. When the people talk about capacity, they forget to mention at what frequency. And yes, the beauty of 5G is says we're going to have radios that can go anywhere. I mean, that's what Intel, when you look at Intel's new chipsets, they're talking about, hey, I'm going to have a radio that can go anywhere from 900 or 2 gigahertz to 60 gigahertz. And I'll choose what I need depending what situation is. That's true. But when you choose the lower one, you're not going to have the same capacity, okay? All I'm saying is when someone talks about...
No, it's a good conversation. I want to have this conversation because it's important, because now it brings up more the opportunity that I see, which is I don't think it's a one-trick pony, and I think that the future, in my opinion, will be based upon using spectrum intelligently. Meaning,
that's what 5G is about.
And that means, okay, spectrum sharing. So it means if for mobility, for instance, and you and I talked about this last time, is that the trade-off between capacity in dense areas versus mobility is the trade-off. So the problem is that the people who own the spectrum are bogarting it for their use.
Well, they need it. But I'll give you an example, okay? People talk about, let's look at a simple use case, okay? Fixed wireless access, okay? Fixed wireless access is probably the best use of early 5G. Compete against cable. I can give you a gigabit top to the home, or I can guarantee you the same as cable, which
as long as it's not snowing.
Well, we'll get to that in a second.
All right.
But let's assume for a second fixed, I'll do that. I'll give you a gigabit max, and I'll do up to 30 or 40 down, and I can do up as well. So as good as cable, as good as Comcast, right? Okay, we won't discuss other things there. I have friends there.
Right? I want the good rate. Don't throttle me down.
As good as Comcast. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, and I know a bit about this from my experience in some mesh companies, what's the density? How many towers per square mile to do that, right? So if you're thinking about regular frequencies, you can use a few per square mile, but that's not what you're thinking about. They're talking about using millimeter wave. Millimeter wave means you need one like every 100 meters, okay? That's expensive.
Base station, you mean, basically.
Yeah, towers, base stations, yeah. That's not...
And that's expensive.
That's expensive. That's not realistic, right? And you'll see, there's all these trials right now about fiber replacement using millimeter wave. Let's catch up in a year and see how those are going.
So efficiency is a key thing. I can see that, but there has to be some sort of sharing, open spectrum thing that I've heard some conversations around the notion of openness.
There is, but it's not in these. It's not in the frequencies that the ones that are important. It's in the higher ones. It's in the millimeter wave because there's so much you can share.
So is 5G stunted at birth?
No, I think 5G is going to be very helpful. It's going to enable you to use a lot more spectrum. I think it's just important when people talk about certain trials to ask them, which frequency were you using? Is it line of sight, non-line of sight? And I think it's going to be much more of an evolution from LTE to LTE Pro than this massive revolution like we had when we moved from, people say, well, it's going to be the difference between, feature phones to smartphones. No, it's not. It's not going to be. Right, because feature phone is like a 300 baud modem, and a smartphone.
Okay, so I'm gonna put you on the spot. So here's the question: what are the key things that you need to see from a benchmarking perspective to give you comfort that the 5G path that they're going down will work? And what are some of the things that give you pause or a red flag?
No, I think it will all work, but I'm just saying, if someone says to me, I'm doing 10 megabit or or a gigabit. Right, on 1 square mile, I'm going to ask him, okay, what frequency are you using and what's the density? So I think it will be better, but I think some of it is going to be LTE advanced. Some of it is going to be better LTE. Now, there are use cases that are going to be much better because of MIMO and so forth. But again, my problem isn't that it's not going to be useful. I think it's going to be very useful. I think when people talk to me and say it's going to be like the difference between a feature phone and a smartphone, and I'm saying, no, it's not. Sorry, it's not.
What do you mean by that? I don't understand.
What I mean is, like, in a feature phone, right, you didn't get any data, you didn't get nothing, right? All you could do is maybe send text messages. In a smartphone, you can watch videos, okay? That's a big difference.
One's a computer, one's a device.
Yeah, it's like 300 baud modem, right? For those who, and probably most of your audience will not know what that is, but 300 baud modem for those who remember at home. And
the dial-up days.
And Comcast today, or even LTE today, okay? That's a big delta, okay? It's not gonna be that level of delta. So if people are expecting the same jump that we had when we moved to LTE, that's not the jump.
So you don't see that jump. Okay, I got to ask you a question. So now put your startup hat on, because you are talking to a lot of companies and
Correct.
You have experience in this area. What are the bright spots, entrepreneurially speaking, in the Valley and in the community around innovations in this area? Physics matters, right? Again, I mean, the fourth thing that we talked about, economics. So physics, legal, economics, authority being security and whatnot, so access.
Innovations in general, or specifically to 5G?
What are the startups working on? So as the startups sit there rubbing their nickels together, inventing new patents, new technologies, where will be the action?
Well, I mean, most of the action, like always, startups or the VCs, as you know, there's sort of a follow lemming kind of environment, and currently there are a bunch of different trends. I mean, first of all, there's the Cambrian explosion of AI. So basically, people have figured out how to do some really interesting AI stuff. Most of it, by the way, just to be clear, and I'm not inventing anything by saying this, is just using things we've known for many years, but we never had the storage and we never had the bandwidth to do it.
And compute.
Yeah, now that you have a Cray and an iPhone, then you can do this. And so people are going back to all these algorithms. Everybody said, well, that's great, but we could never do it, and they're running machine learning. So now the question is, the same way that people said, how can I apply compute to stuff back in the day? Now people are saying, well, what can I apply machine learning to? Can I apply it to security? Can I apply it to customer service? Can I apply it to drones? Can I apply it to cars? So there's a massive, everywhere I go to talk to someone, I'm applying AI. I mean, there's all these companies doing AI to Wi-Fi, right? And this is real. This is not like noise. They are actually putting things. There's a lot of AI voice now. Is the next big thing is, oh, we're going to make voice AI. I wrote a bit of an article about how AI is the big thing for the iPhone, because you can talk to your iPhone and send messages, which for me is very useful because I can't type very well, according to people who receive my messages at least. So I think there's a huge element of AI for something. Like, before there was, like 2 years ago, it was big data for something. Now it's AI for something.
We're here with Saar Gillai, industry executive. It's on theCUBE. Let's stay on the AI theme. AI, obviously, I think AI is super hyped up more than 5G, but I think AI is simply a mental model for people to put their hands on, because IBM's proven with IBM Cognitive and Watson winning the Jeopardy, gives people, oh my God, that's the magic I've been waiting for, some magical things happening. But AI's been around for a while. To your point,
now not like this though.
Well, because of the points you mentioned. You got storage, you got compute, you got some data. So the question for you is, data is greater than algorithms, or algorithms are greater than data? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? That's the debate. Which ones comes
well,
first?
I think neither are useful without the other. I mean, data...
Would you rather have data over the algorithms, or algorithm first, then the data?
If I have the algorithm, but I don't get the data, the algorithm is not that useful. So you got to have the data, but if you have the data, you need to go apply the algorithm. The thing is, I would say there's more scarcity in data than algorithm, okay? Because data you have to get from somewhere, which is why some of the big cloud providers, or IBM, have such an advantage because they already have the data. You know, IBM bought all the hair-scale data. So you need the data. Algorithms are less scarce because, you know, again, a lot of AI stuff is out there in the open. It's not like it's this big secret algorithm that nobody can figure out. But if you run the data and you work it. So I think data in general is more important, which is why it is harder as a
quality
startup.
data, clean data or relevant data.
Relevant data that it can be used for learning and teaching is very important. If you have an algorithm and you don't have access to data, you can't even improve the algorithm.
Saar, I want to ask you kind of just take a step back. Let's go up into the trees and watch the wind blow and take a high level view of the marketplace, and let's kind of smoke the peace pipe and think about the future. Let's talk about, I want to get your thoughts. So we're going to look back at this time now and say, okay, all this IoT, 5G maybe will come in whatever form it will be, but clearly the iPhone in 2007 was a seminal moment. Now we're in this transitional era where a lot of new things are happening. Obviously, they trot out the autonomous cars and smart cities, all that stuff. That's nice, sexy eye candy for the people to get a picture of it. But there's going to be a management book, a Peter Drucker or some sort of core competency version of Harvard Business School or Babson Business School, where people are going to say the successful management techniques of that time were blank.
So first of all, it's always easy to look back, right? Everyone's a genius looking back.
I was going to say, let's smoke the peace pipe and look down.
But in general, I think that since the environment is so dynamic, speed of decision making is important. And I think if there's one thing that I think has become more and more important is, you know, things are faster and faster. You know, it used to be that it would be 4 years to release a product, then it would be 1 year. Now they release it every few days based on stuff. So building whatever you build has to be built in a way that it's fast and it can adjust to changes. I always tell people, let's focus on what you know and focus on what you don't know. What you don't know, figure out what your assumptions are and test those assumptions every few days to see if it's changed. And I think managing through change and building an environment that is flexible is going to be critical. And I think that's really, you know, you see the companies that are successful, they're able to change. As soon as they see something different, as soon as they see something, they change. They don't take 9 months to plan it out. Obviously harder for large companies, but and iterate.
Final question, share some anecdotal comment around what you're hearing in the coffee shops in Palo Alto or Los Altos where you live, or in Silicon Valley in general. What's some of the general sentiment right now that you're overhearing or having direct conversations with these days in the Valley? What's going on?
Well, I think there's different aspects, I think, but you know, in the funding area, I think it's getting colder. It's getting harder. I think people are now asking for customers, paying customers, you know, proof points more than, let's say, it was 2 or 3 years ago. So I think it's become, and maybe it hasn't shown up yet at the higher level, but I think you can see that, and it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it's harder. Funding now, the bar to get funding has gone up.
Saar Gillai here in the Silicon Valley Friday Show. Thanks for coming on. Our next segment will be, you know, Alan Cohen coming on, and we'll be talking more about what's going on in Silicon Valley and after this short break.
Robert Herjavec.
People obviously know you from Shark Tank, but the Herjavec Group has been really laser focused on cybersecurity.
So I actually helped to bring a product called Checkpoint to Canada, firewalls, URL filtering, that kind of stuff.
But you're also an entrepreneur, right? And you know the business. You've been in software, you're in the tech business. And on Shark Tank, you get a lot of pitches as entertainment meets business.
On our show, we're a bubble. We don't do a lot of tech deals like we're talking because it's boring TV. Tech people love tech.
Yeah.
Consumers love the benefit of tech. Yeah. You know, no consumer opens up their iPhone and says, oh my gosh, I love the technology behind my iPhone.
What's it been like being on the Shark Tank?
You know, filming is fun and hanging out is fun, and it's fun to be a celebrity at first. Your head gets really big and you get really good tables at restaurants. And
Who says tech isn't got a little pizzazz? I mean,
More skin in the game.
today for us.
In charge of his destiny.
Great, you guys are exciting.
Robert Herjavec.
No.
Dancing with Stars, of course.
Is CUBE alumni. You're listening to the Silicon Valley Friday Show with John Furrier.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We are here at the Silicon Valley Friday Show. I'm John Furrier. This week, a lot of stuff happening in Silicon Valley, and our guest on this segment is Alan Cohen, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of Illumio. Back. Great to have you. Great commentary. Always fun to shoot the breeze with you here and talk about what's going on in Silicon Valley. Obviously, you you're a legend in Silicon Valley, and last time we were on the show, the New York Times wrote up our content. So let's see if we can't get to the next highest pantheon
Fake news.
of fake news. the failing New York Times picked us up. So great to have them. So let's create some fake news right now.
Okay.
So what do you have for fake news to us today?
Fake news and fake news. Well, obviously, one of the things this week in the Valley is don't be an asshole, right? Oops, I'm sorry. We're allowed to say that on the air?
No, it's internet TV. You can say what you want. You can drop the F-bomb if you want to. So you're referring to the Uber guy, SVP of engineering, who was fired because he did not disclose in his hiring process to Uber from Google that there was a sexual harassment claim against him. But this is on the heels of Travis eating the PR nightmare the week before about a woman who was filed a sexual harassment with HR, and they didn't take action on it because he was a high performer, programmer culture, fast and loose rocket ship in Silicon Valley, bad behavior, dredge up all this dirt. So, the lynch mob went after Travis, and then the VP of engineering gets hung because they found some historical non-verified claim, although Kara Swisher claims that she did verify it, but no one charges were ever filed.
Right, so I'm not personally close to the situation. I don't know any of the principals involved, but there's two lessons for us here in Silicon Valley. One, the tolerance for bad behavior is pretty low, and the ability to, as a superpowered individual, to protect your own rights or to take action against bad behavior. Once again, I'm not a judge, I'm not judging the facts in it, is pretty high.
Yeah.
Right, so for those of us who grew up in kind of more corporate environment, you saw things, but things kind of got squashed down. You can write a blog and turn an entire company inside out in a week. So I think
referring to the woman's claims and the commentary.
Right. I mean, I read it. It's horrifying stuff. If it's true, their head should roll, right? Yeah. So I think we all who are building companies, right, and we're a little smaller than Uber and Lumia, we're working on it, right? But it's you're never too small, and you're never too large.
But bad behavior happens. We were just talking. I mean, hell, I've done a lot of bad behavior in my days, but that was before Instagram and YouTube was around. But it's all fun. You're in your 20s and you're doing some crazy things. But this is borderline, really, really bad stuff. So young companies. This is a lesson to me on what I call the fast and loose rocket ships.
Right.
The companies that just rapidly grow, go from 30 employees to 1,000, huge venture capital investment, processes aren't in place, they're not baked, and then the culture from the top. You got to act on these things. I mean, I think you got to rip the weeds out early.
Well, you have to do that, right? I mean, I think help me, the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, right? Says we don't tolerate assholes even if they're high performers. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of it's a great lesson for people who are building companies. And you can't, like Uber's not a small company, right? It's actually a fairly large company, and it's almost a public utility. We all use Uber and love this service. Yeah. So I think we're all being schooled or reminded that we're in a different business
And the
climate.
Reed Hastings quotes is critical. I'm going to rephrase it because I think it's important because this applies to Uber.
Right.
His quote was, even the high-performing assholes can be disruptive to the company, implying that they're not worth it.
Not worth it.
In this case, the Uber, the woman was harassed sexually by as HR said, a high-performing employee. So that's a case in point to the Reid Hoffman's ethos there. But then also with the Google guy, he was fired because he was the SVP of engineering, again, in the same department of the engineering, where diversity.
But it breaks down, it's really simple, like don't lie. And don't ever do anything you want to read about in the New York Times the next day. Yeah. It's just kind of a couple of cardinal rules, and it just doesn't really work, right? And what's a real lesson is that you have a company that has created an enormous amount of value. Has created a great service that it's been terrific, right? And
Kara Swisher broke that story, and I thought she had it. She kind of did bury it a little at the end, but she's pointing out the bad behavior, and he wasn't truthful. But she then went on to say that he was really well respected. Now, so again,
so
back
Stalin,
to
right?
Again, back to your point about truth.
Yeah, no, I think look, I always said, we were joking about fake news, right? Most marketing in the Valley is some form of fake news about products. Right, no one is ever as good as their product. I would never do that myself, of course, but there's never any.
It's always the demo version always works great.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody flipped the switch wrong, right? The API was off. So, we tend to because we're creating things all the time, bend the curve a little. But in interactions among people, you can't bend the curve. Like you can push people hard, you can ask them to work hard, you can incentivize them to put in nights and weekends and give up a lot of their times, but you can't treat them other than human beings. And I think it's people are very tense right now in the country, because of the political environment, and I think things are very hyper intense on that front, but
I mean, certainly the Trump situation is pretty radical with the whole immigration thing, and now with his policies, it's just people are going crazy here.
Well, I mean, you also have 24-hour news cycle. That's the other thing. Whether it's any of these incidents, like nothing goes away, right? And it gets. It gets thrown on Facebook, it gets thrown on Twitter. I mean, look at Twitter. Twitter is like a really cool company. It's had the exact same product for 8 years, hasn't changed, right? And interestingly, the other kind of thing for us here in Silicon Valley is that the vehicles that people are increasingly used to get information haven't been necessarily particularly advanced. Yeah. Right, because the other big thing that's gone on in the Valley the last 2 weeks has been kind of a recursive and reflexive look at the inability to sort out fake news and bad information on these increasingly important vehicles for news and information, right? There is no editor on Twitter. You can say whatever you want. You can repeat things, the stories, and I think actually it was last week or this week, I think both Google and Facebook has started, I think, fairly significant and aggressive moves.
Well, we had Paul Martino on. We had Paul Martino on, who was again talking about this collective intelligence, and he doesn't think AI can solve the fake news problem because there's so much context. I think the fundamental things that we're seeing here at SiliconANGLE, and my opinion is that a new trust networks will develop. And you said something last time you were on the Silicon Valley Friday show around paying it forward is part of the way that you've been interacting in the Valley, and that's been your thing.
Yeah, I mean,
trust. People have to build these new trust relationships because now data is coming at us so fast. How do you vet what's real? Because you never know. I mean, I could throw a haymaker tomorrow with a blog post and cause a shitstorm, and then someone's career could be ruined. It could be true. It could be false.
Well, I mean, you could look at it two ways. I mean, so the open nature of the internet is trust everything, right? And accept everything. Actually, so like, I mean, if you think about like what we're doing in the security world, our world is like we trust nothing. Like we only allow, Lumio only allows things that have been licensed for trust and been certified to pass. It basically says no to everything else. It's the actually complete opposite of the internet networking model, and maybe there's an analog for information, which is instead of, like, you don't want to restrict information, but if you're going to say everything can just pass through as it is, and you have no way to filter it using AI, you're going to run risks. It's like a bad news story is the equivalent of a virus. In a computer network, right? Which is like, say, hey, my network's completely open. Whoever wants to use it, and bam, phishing attack, take down the whole company, ransomware, and that's like, oh, well, we have to get some security in place. Well, if the if the news network or Twitter or the social network has no filters, you're going to have the same issue. So I think it's
so. Is there a protected tweet these days? You got to protect yourself with some sort of viral disease that's going to go on Twitter. Here's HIV Twitter, or
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't go there, but I think it's. I think cut that out completely. So no, but
speaking of Twitter, Mark Andreessen made a comeback. You saw that? He tweeted.
No, I haven't seen. What did he say? I'm back.
His first tweet was, he said, "I will take questions, and if I answer your email, you have to pay $20 for Black women who code."
Oh, Ben did that. I think it's really great, actually.
Ben did that?
Ben was first, Mark was second.
Okay, so Mark came out of the retirement, and the commentary, the memes that were traveling on this were, he didn't want Trump to have all the fun.
Oh.
Because Mark's pretty prolific on Twitter.
He can be, right? He invented the tweet storm. So, but I think, by the way, if you had to pay after every 5 tweets a day, it might be more interesting too. This is a great business. I always said this would be a great business model.
I think the guy said, retweet me. I'll give you $20 if you retweet me.
Yeah, well.
He didn't retweet me, but then there's a fake bot that retweeted me and said, you're not the real Mark Andreessen.
So I think we're at the beginning. So, if you net it out, we're at the beginning of, I think, somebody actually thinking about what the next business model is for social media, particularly as it deals with information. This is not like picture, like, puppy pictures are free. Your kid's snowsuit that up in Tahoe, that's really free. But I think if they are going to become information vehicles, I think people are going to look at it. Plus, it's a great opportunity for the media companies trying to figure out how to make some money.
Well, Andreessen's obviously huge, and Ben as well, Bitcoin fanatics as well as we are. I think what I liked about his tweet was, if you can read through the gesture there, what I was reading into it, to your point about the business model, is Twitter's a transactional network. It's not a really social network per se. It's a communications, quote John Markoff, how he used to talk about blogs and podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like CB radio for the world, right? People are talking, loudspeaker. But there is an element, what he's doing with the $20 concept is that there's the micropayment concept of, for certain things, there's transactional opportunities.
Yes. Well, I mean, here's the issue. It's like people are willing to pay for stuff that's good. Right? I mean, we learned a couple of lessons, right, in the last couple of months. Like, the paywall actually worked for Washington Post. That Jeff Bezos, he never loses, does he? And he's really good.
And the New York Times says every time that Trump says the New York Times is a failing paper, the subscriptions go through the roof.
But if you strip the politics aside for a second, what it tells you is that there's an increasing population that are looking for better informed, embedded, edited commentary and information. And that's why, because when the paywalls came out, you spent your entire life trying to figure out how to get around the paywall, right? And now people are saying, given all the junk out there, I'd rather pay the paywall. It's not necessarily political, because I actually like the news source. Maybe you'll see similar kind of filters on Twitter, where there's kind of like good content and bad content. I mean, it's a complex
We've been getting
world.
a lot of reactions on the Silicon Valley Friday show when I bring up politics, because, and I even put up Facebook post and said, should we do some political coverage on theCUBE and kind of have a Meet the Press? Now, I didn't mean Meet the Press like a political show, and then it was almost dead 50-50, no, yes. It was almost polarized. But then one guy texted, I got all these direct messages and texts personally, and said, you should do it because Bezos owns the Washington Post, all the tech executives in DC, Travis at Uber is involved in a lot of policy stuff. More than ever, tech is closer to politics now than ever. Since my lifetime in tech now, in 30 years I've been in the tech industry, it was never about politics. I mean, it was like more libertarian on our side, but now more than ever, there's a thread of politics.
Well, you've lost the localization element, right? Because things are because of the internet. There isn't like something happened in Palo Alto and only people in Palo Alto knew about it. Everyone knew about it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's why it creates a great disruption opportunity. Right. So on some level, I think the tech entrance into politics is yet another form of disruption. Actually, there's a very, there's OpenGov. I don't know if you've seen that company, which is showing how localities use budgets. It's a great 8VC company.
A lot of big data involved in politics.
Yes.
And again, another commentary I heard was, Hollywood's paying attention to Silicon Valley, obviously, and so is DC. So, the question is that for us vets that
I had Jared Leto. I got to do a selfie with him. He looks just like my IT guy.
Really?
Yeah, he's a cool guy. He came by the office.
So we should bring that warrior's mentality to politics. What do you think? Are you on the yes or no or maybe?
I'm going to hit the button on both sides. You're not supposed to do that because, on one hand,
I think policy stuff is important to me. Immigration's huge for me. I'm real pro-entrepreneurship.
Yes.
To me, I think there's some real tech policy issues that should be talked about.
Well, there's two reasons why
it's not about Trump or Hillary. I'm not into
No,
that
on some level, tech is an increasingly large part of the economy, and the economy and politics go together, right? And Washington go together, right? There are implications for these things. So I think
look at transportation is being disrupted by Uber. That's a generational disruption. Drones is a generational disruption. Right. Cyber warfare that we talked about at RSA, huge generational disruption. These are political threads. They have an era of influence that smart people.
Politics are war by any other mean, right? Yeah. And they're and politics are usually about one side trying to get its perspective or its interest advanced versus others. I think it'd be very interesting to do that, but can you do it in a way that's not in the hothouse of Silicon Valley just by itself?
Yeah.
So
I just worry about politics in general because it's just the 50-50 split right now is just you alienate 50% of the people and there's no civil discourse of any kind right now. It's just, my Facebook feed is just so bad. It's ridiculous.
Well, I'm actually more of an optimist. I think we're in a great national debate about kind of future direction of the country. But I got to tell you, it's not exactly Kent State burning cars, protesting in Washington, and 500,000 American troops in Southeast Asia, right? So we've had periods in our history. I think we've actually gotten Maybe this is another way of saying I'm old, right? But it's
we get comfortable.
We get comfortable, and we forget that the world's like a real place, and it's going to ebb and flow, and there are going to be things we agree with and with things we disagree with. We're doing this, and look, I mean, the economy, you can argue it's lousy or bad. I mean, the economy is actually not terrible. I mean, but there are parts of the country that have completely been missed by economic recovery. That's a lot about what the debate is about. So we in tech, if we're going to kill jobs, I mean, there has been a couple of folks actually recently who said, should there be a robot tax? Like if you're going to remove a job,
that thing.
Yeah, no, it's a really. So I mean, if we're
basic income thing too is another one.
Basic income. So, and by the way, you got to love the Nordics because they're all sitting on a pool of oil too. So it's really easy to have basic income when you have like 3 million people sitting on $100 million people's worth of natural resources and wealth.
You're looking pretty good there.
Yeah, I like Denmark.
Pretty.
It is, but I think if you really want to have that political debate, you got to look at what the implications are for the whole country. Not like, is it going to give me a 15x return on my fund or my company, or can I mean, this shouldn't be like, do I be wealthy enough to get a second vineyard? The question should, right? I mean, right? It's like market. It's like that's what a lot of people are worried about, because we also have, just like New York and LA and other places, we have enormous concentrations of wealth, and it'll definitely warp your perspective.
I worry about the security too. I mean, the ability to manufacture dirty bombs and all kinds of chemical warfare. I mean, smuggling into.
Well, we we're like on the Sunday talk show version of theCUBE now, right?
Yeah.
It's not really Friday afternoon. It's like, I'm just waiting, for like Northrop Grumman to come in and do the ads in between the debates. And like next you'll have after Alan, Senator McCain talking about the
issue number 2.
Yes.
Alan, always great to have you. Obviously, great, and I love your economic background on all this stuff, and last conversation, great stuff. And again, entrepreneurship. Again, this is what, and it could be worse. It could be really worse than it is right now.
Well, I mean, we have an enthusiasm for building the future because it's what we've been doing for the last 70 years, and I just hope we can spread it to something, take some of that traffic and get it out of the peninsula into the rest of the country. I always say if I'm going to build a development center in the emerging world, I'm going to start with Detroit.
Yeah, it's all coming here too. Detroit is coming here to Silicon Valley as well. Silicon Valley Friday Show, Alan Cohen, wrapping it up. See you next week. I'm John Furrier. Thanks for watching.